a little law of cosines. So we just did law of sines, and law of sines and law of cosines are both for non-right triangles. Okay, they're not going to have a right angle in them. If they have a right angle in them, you're going to use Pythagorean theorem, or you're going to use trig, just sine, cosine, tangent. So when we talked a minute on our last video about law of sines, I said to you, if you have an angle measure and the side across from it, you're going to use law of sines. So if I have a triangle here and I'm given an angle measure and the side across from it, I can use law of sines. Okay? But sometimes I'm not given that information. I'm given different information, so I have to use what is called law of cosines. So I'm going to write down the law of cosines first. It's a little bit lengthier than law of sines, and then we're going to work a few problems with that. So law of cosines actually has three versions. It's the same as, they're all the same thing. It's just rearranging it depending on the information that you have. So the law of cosines is a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine a. Now, if you look at that first part, it looks a lot like the Pythagorean theorem, okay? And so then you're just adding the last little piece. The next version is b squared equals a squared plus c squared minus 2ac cosine b. And then the last version is c squared equals a squared plus b squared minus 2ab cosine c. So it's the same thing all three times. It's just that the letters are rearranged. Okay? It depends on what information you're given. All right. So we're going to start with, let's just dive into a problem. So here's my triangle. And they're going to tell me that little b equals 13. And they're going to tell me that little c equals 11. And they're going to tell me that big A is 42 degrees. So in this problem, I do not have an angle measure and the side across from it. So I cannot use law of sines. So I have to use law of cosines. And so if you go back here, I have three options that I can use. And I have to say, which one of these am I going to pick to use? Well, if you look in your picture, we have angle A. So I'm going to use the version where I have cosine A. Okay, so I'm going to use a squared equals b squared plus c squared minus 2bc cosine A. Okay, because I'm looking for this little a here. And so if I use this version, I'll only have one unknown. So a squared equals 13 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 13 times 11 cosine 42. Now, before you type all of this in your calculator, and you can type this entire thing into your calculator at one time, I want to just say a couple of things. If you don't feel comfortable typing all of this in at one time and you want to break it up into pieces, that's fine. Let me do that first, and then I'll show you another way to type it all in at one time. So if I were going to break this up into pieces, this right here, let me do a bracket. 2 times 13 times 11 is one number, okay? 2 times 13 times 11 is 286 cosine 42. Now, you have to follow order of operations. This is where y'all mess this up. 286 cosine 42 is one number. It's an entire thing, okay? So if you're doing this piece by piece, you're going to have 290 minus 286 cosine 42. Now I'm going to say this more than once. You cannot take these two numbers and subtract them because 286 is being multiplied by cosine 42. And order of operations tells me that I have to multiply before I can add or subtract. So do not subtract 290 minus 286 and write 4 cosine 42. Do not do that, okay? Type in your calculator 290 minus 286 cosine 42. So let's pull this calculator up and we move it over to the other side so you can see everything. If you want to go back to right here, okay, if you want to go back to right here, you can type all of that in at one time, okay? You can type in 13 squared plus 11 squared minus 2 times 13 times 11. And I think I'm going to go ahead and hit times before I do the cosine 42. Okay? And if it makes you more comfortable putting parentheses around this right here, you can do that as well. All right? So I'm going to hit enter. Oh, I forget. Hold on. I forget I'm still in this different version than y'all. Let me put a little decimal here and see if that helps. There we go. All right. So this says 77.46. Now, that is not what A equals. That is what A squared equals. Okay, so if I go back to my equation, it says A squared equals that. See here, A squared. So I've got to take the square root of that number, okay? And what I would rather you do is I would rather you put the answer in. I would rather you not round it before you take the square root of it. So what I want you to do right now is I want you to do control x squared. And that's going to give you your square root. And then I want you to hit control answer. That's going to take the answer that it just gave you, the 77.4606, and that's going to insert it underneath the radical. And it's going to do that before it is rounded. So please do it this way or your numbers are going to be off from mine. Okay? So you should have gotten 8.80 centimeters. So A here is 8.80 centimeters. All right? Now, at this point, we have an angle measure and the side across from it. So we can now switch to law of sines. Now, if you are Googling any videos or if you are still having using a tutor, in law of cosine, they have what are called ambiguous cases, meaning you could work the problem differently and get two different answers. I am not giving you any ambiguous cases. So if that comes up, if you hear that or read that or your tutor asks you about an ambiguous case, we are not doing ambiguous cases. You will do that when you get to trig with Miss Van Uden. So we're going to switch to law of sines. You don't have to. You could continue with law of cosines, but law of sines is an easier problem to work, okay? So I'm going to switch and I'm going to say sine A over A equals, and you can do B or C. It doesn't matter. We'll just do B. Sine B over B. So sine 42 over 8.8 equals sine B over 13. Now, I hope that you've realized at this point we are looking for an angle measure, which means we're going to have to use inverse sine. So cross multiply 13 sine 42 equals 8.8 sine B. We're dividing by 8.8, so sine B equals 13 sine 42 over 8.8, okay? So in your calculator, I want you to do control divide. 13 sine 42, 13 sine 42 over 8.8. And I just totally messed that up for y'all. So I want you to think before I say it what I did wrong. Okay, I typed this in, but I did not type in inverse sine. And I'm looking for an angle measure. So let's go back. Type inverse sine first because we're looking for an angle measure. Okay? Then do control divide 13 sine 42 over 8.8. Okay? You go to the inverse sine because we're looking for an angle measure. Okay, 81.3. We'll just go to the 10th. 30. 81.30. Okay, so angle B is 81.30. Now, at this point, to find C, all you need to do is add these two together and then subtract from 180. Okay, so you can still do that. You don't have to do a law of sine or law of cosine. So you're going to do 42 plus 81.3 and then subtract that from 180 and you should get 56.7 degrees. Okay? All right, let's do another one of these. And then after we do another one together,